She spent 5 years in Canada, eating 1 meal a day, sleeping in a basement without heating, and sending every single dollar home to the man she was going to marry. The day she finally came home, she walked through the gate of the house she built to find him standing at an altar, marrying her own sister. Before we go any further, if this kind of story speaks to you, please like this video right now, subscribe to the Helen Folktale channel, and drop a comment telling us where in the world you are watching from. We have a beautiful community here and we want to know you are part of it. Now, let us get into the story. Blessing had grown up in Surulere in a house where the rules were simple and the expectations were clear. You worked, you kept your word, you did not take what did not belong to you, and you did not pretend to be something you were not. Her father had been a civil servant for 31 years, the kind of man who ironed his own shirt every Sunday evening for the week ahead and kept a small notebook in his breast pocket where he wrote down everything he owed and everything he was owed, not from suspicion, but from the belief that a life worth living was a life kept in order. Her mother had been a caterer who woke before 5 every morning and whose jollof rice was the kind of thing people in the neighborhood talked about the way they talked about landmarks. Between the two of them, they had raised Blessing and her younger sister Esther to understand that dignity is not something you are given, it is something you build, quietly and consistently, one decision at a time. Blessing had studied nursing at the University of Lagos. She had graduated in the top third of her class, not because she was the most naturally gifted student in the room, but because she was the most disciplined. She understood early that talent without consistency is just potential, and potential without execution is just a story you tell yourself. She got a job at a private clinic in Ikeja after graduation, lived carefully, saved a portion of every salary, and was, by any honest assessment, building a stable and respectable life. Then she met Peter. Peter was the kind of man who made a room feel like something was about to happen. He was tall and broad-shouldered with the easy confidence of someone who had never seriously doubted whether he was worth paying attention to. He was charming without being obvious about it, funny in a way that felt spontaneous rather than performed, and when he talked about the future, he talked about it with such specific and convincing detail that you found yourself inside the picture he was painting before you had consciously agreed to step into it. He was also, and this was the thing that made him dangerous to a woman like Blessing, he was genuinely warm in the beginning. Not performing warmth, genuinely feeling it and expressing it the way certain people can before they learn how to use it strategically. They dated for 18 months. Blessing brought him home-cooked food on Sundays. Peter showed up at her clinic sometimes with cold drinks and the particular unhurried attention of a man who wanted to be seen paying attention. They talked on the phone every night. They made plans the way people in love make plans, with the casual confidence of people who assume the future will cooperate. It was Blessing's colleague, a woman named Sister Josephine, who had worked in the United Kingdom for 8 years before returning home, who first mentioned the possibility. "There is a hospital in Alberta, Canada," Sister Josephine said one afternoon during a quiet shift. "They are taking internationally trained nurses. The pay is almost unreal compared to what we earn here, the exchange rate alone." Blessing had gone home that evening and made a spreadsheet. She had always made spreadsheets. It was the thing about her that Peter found both endearing and slightly bewildering, her compulsion to quantify everything before committing to it. She calculated the salary, she converted it to Naira at the current rate, she subtracted estimated living cost in Canada, estimated cost of flights, estimated tax deductions, then she projected the net savings over 2 years, 3 years, and 5 years. The 5-year number made her sit very still for a long time. She brought it to Peter. They talked about it for 3 nights running, sitting on the small balcony of her Ikeja apartment, with the city spread out below them and the kind of long, unhurried conversations that are only possible between people who have not yet run out of things to say to each other. "Go," Peter said on the 3rd night. He was holding her hands across the small balcony table. His eyes were steady, and his voice was the voice of a man making a promise he fully intended to keep. "Go and build what we need. Send money home when you can, and I will find land, hire the best contractor I can afford, and build our house. Something this neighborhood will see and know we made it. When it is ready, you will come home and we will get married properly, and everything you sacrificed will have been worth it." He made it sound so clean, so mutual, so full of shared purpose. Blessing believed every word. She had no reason not to. She had known him for 18 months. She had introduced him to her parents. She had watched him sit with her father for 2 hours one Sunday afternoon talking about the economic history of Lagos with the seriousness of a man who respected the people his woman came from. She had watched him hold her mother's hands and say yes ma and no ma with the ease of genuine affection rather than performance. She had no evidence of anything other than exactly what he appeared to be. She packed 2 suitcases. She went to the airport with Peter and Esther on both sides of her. Esther had cried from the moment they left the house all the way to the departure gate. The specific grief of a younger sister who has never been separated from the person who has always been both sibling and parent to her since their mother and father died 3 years before. Blessing had held her face between both hands at the gate and said, I am doing this for us, for our future. I will call every Sunday without fail, and I will send money every month, and you will be safe. Peter will look after you like you are his own family. She had looked at Peter when she said this. He had nodded. He had said, she is my sister now, you know that. She would not understand for 5 years what they had actually cost her. The hospital in Alberta was not what she had imagined. She had imagined a version of the clinic in Ikeja, but colder and better funded. What she found was a large, efficiently managed institution where the work was relentless and the weather outside the window was a daily reminder of how far she was from everything familiar. The cold in Alberta is not the mild harmattan cool of a Nigerian December morning. It is a cold that has opinions about you. A cold that finds the gap between your collar and your scarf and makes itself at home there. A cold that makes every outdoor journey feel like a physical argument you are losing. She had found accommodation through a contact of Sister Josephine's, a room in a shared house in a suburb 40 minutes from the hospital, shared with 4 other people who worked rotating shifts, and mostly moved through the common areas like polite ghosts, exchanging brief courtesies in the kitchen and otherwise keeping to themselves. The room was small and clean and had a window that looked onto a parking lot and a gas station. It had decorated it with 2 photographs from home, one of her parents taken at a friend's wedding the year before they died, smiling and dressed in matching asoebi, and one of her and Esther at Christmas, arms around each other, Esther's head on her Sihon Blessing's shoulder. She had looked at those photographs every morning before leaving for the hospital. Some mornings they were the thing that got her out of bed. The work was hard, but it was knowable. She was a competent nurse, and she understood quickly how to navigate the specific rhythms and expectations of this new environment. She made herself useful in the ways that get noticed, arriving early, staying late when needed, asking questions rather than guessing, learning the names of every patient on her ward within the first week of every new rotation. Her supervisor, a Scottish woman named Margaret, who had been in Alberta for 20 years and had seen enough internationally trained nurses to know within a month whether someone came to work or came to process paperwork, noticed Blessing by the end of the 2nd week. That woman is serious, Margaret said to the ward manager after Blessing's first performance review. Keep her busy. The ones who get into trouble here are always the ones who have too much time to think. Blessing had no time to think. She worked, she came home, she called Peter on Tuesdays and Fridays, she called Esther every Sunday. She sent money on the last day of every month without exception, a transfer so regular you could have set a calendar by it. The first transfer had been the hardest to send, not because she did not want to send it, but because standing in the currency exchange office, looking at the number she was about to wire, and knowing what it represented in hours of her body's labor on cold concrete floors, it made the sacrifice visceral in a way that the spreadsheet at home in Ikeja had not. She sent it anyway. She sent it because the spreadsheet had shown her where it was going, and the spreadsheet did not lie, even when the reality of earning it was harder than the calculation had anticipated. Peter received every transfer with enthusiasm in the early months. He called her the day each one landed. He described what it was going for, the land survey, the initial foundation costs, the first delivery of building materials. He sent voice notes walking around the site and photographs that she saved immediately and kept in a dedicated album on her phone. She would look at them late at night when the house on the other side of the parking lot was quiet, the cleared red earth, the foundation taking shape, the walls beginning to rise, and feel the particular warmth of watching a plan work exactly as planned, of watching sacrifice become something visible and permanent on the other side of the world. She had also, in the 3rd month, done something she told no one about. She had contacted a property lawyer in Lagos through an online referral and arranged for the title deed of the property to be registered in her name. Not Peter's name, not both their names, hers alone. She had done this not from suspicion. She had no specific suspicion at that stage, nothing concrete, nothing she could have named in a courtroom, but from a principle her mother had instilled in her so early it had become instinct. Her mother had always said, "A woman can love completely and still keep her name on the paper. These are not contradictions. Love is what you feel. The deed is what protects you when feeling is not enough." Blessing had kept this to herself. She had told herself she would tell Peter when she came home, that they would laugh about it together, her and her documents, her and her spreadsheet, always protecting herself from scenarios that would never happen. She could not have imagined in that third month in Alberta with the photographs of the rising wars on her phone screen that the scenario she was protecting herself from was not only possible but was already beginning to take shape in a house she had not yet seen with her own eyes. The years settled into a rhythm that was sustainable, if not comfortable. She learned the patterns of the Alberta winter, which weeks were merely brutal and which weeks required the specific internal preparation of a person about to do something genuinely difficult, simply to get to work and back. She learned which grocery store had the best prices for the specific ingredients that made her Sunday cooking feel like home. She learned which of her colleagues would talk to her like a person and which ones saw her as a category rather than an individual, and she managed those relationships accordingly, warmly with the former, professionally with the latter, never with bitterness because bitterness is expensive and she had no budget for it. She did not buy herself many things. She bought a good pair of thermal boots in year 2 because the cheap ones from year 1 had given her frostbite on 2 toes, and she had stood in the boot store holding the expensive pair and made the calculation in under 30 seconds, the cost of treating frostbite long-term versus the cost of the boots, and put them in the basket. That was the most she had spent on herself in any single purchase for 3 years. She ate simply, she dressed for function, she sent money home. Peter's calls had changed by year 3. The change was not dramatic. It was the kind of change that is easy to explain away in the moment and impossible to deny when you look back at the full arc of it. The calls became slightly shorter. The voice note stopped. The construction photographs continued, but with less narrative, just the image, sometimes a caption, without the walking around commentary she had loved in the early months. When she asked specific questions about the progress, she received answers that were technically accurate, but somehow contained less of him, less presence, less warmth. The specific warmth of a person who is engaged with what they are telling you rather than reporting it. She noticed. She did not know what to do with what she noticed. She had no evidence of anything specific. She had only the feeling of something thin where there used to be something thick. And feelings without evidence are not ground for a confrontation from 3,000 miles away with a man who holds the physical reality of your 5-year sacrifice in his hands. She told herself he was tired. She told herself the construction stress was getting to him. She told herself that relationships naturally lose some of their high frequency over time and that this was normal and manageable and would correct itself when she came home. Esther's calls, meanwhile, remained as consistent and chatty as ever. Esther talked about everything, her lectures, her friends, the neighborhood gossip, what she had cooked that week, a funny thing that happened at the market. Esther laughed on their Sunday calls the way she had always laughed, easily and often. And Blessing listened with the specific hunger of someone who needs the texture of ordinary life in a familiar place that they can no longer touch. Esther never mentioned anything that should have alarmed Blessing. She asked about her relationship with Peter occasionally, how he was, whether he needed anything, whether Esther felt safe and cared for. And Esther always said he was fine, he was around, everything was fine. Cheerful, specific, detailed enough to be convincing. The thought that connected these two things, Peter's withdrawal and Esther's cheerfulness, arrived fully formed one night at the end of year 4. Blessing had been lying in the dark after a long shift and it had simply appeared, the way certain thoughts appear when you have been keeping them out long enough that your defenses finally tire. She had looked at it directly. She had looked at the full shape of it. And then she had stood up, gone to the kitchen, made tea, sat at the small table with both hands around the mug, and made a decision. She did not have evidence. She would not act on a feeling from 3,000 miles away with 1 year left in her plan. She would finish what she came to do. She would come home and she would trust the documents. She went back to bed. She slept. She woke up before 5. She went to work. In year 5, she passed her advanced certification examination on the first attempt. She received her result on a Tuesday morning and stood in the hospital corridor looking at her phone screen for a long moment before calling anyone. She called Sister Josephine first because Sister Josephine spent 3 lunch breaks helping her prepare. She called Esther second because Esther would scream with genuine delight and she needed to hear that. She did not call Peter. She wasn't entirely sure why. She told herself he was probably busy. The call that she had been waiting for came 6 weeks later, a Wednesday evening. Peter's voice on the phone carrying a brightness she had not heard from him in months, perhaps longer. "Blessing, the house is complete. Everything is finished. Come home, come and see what we built." She had pressed her hand over her mouth in the small kitchen of the shared house in Alberta, her eyes filling with tears that she had been keeping in reserve for this specific moment without knowing it. They talked for 40 minutes, the longest call in 2 years. Peter sounded warm and present and like himself again, the version of himself from the early months, and she had let herself believe that the distance was simply the distance, and now that the distance was ending, so was everything that came with it. She did not buy herself many things in those final weeks. She bought a good dress, cream and structured, the kind of dress that says, "I have arrived somewhere I earned and I know it." She bought gifts for Esther. She arranged her affairs at the hospital, gave proper notice, received a reference letter from Margaret that said in its final line, she brought exceptional commitment to this role and she will bring exceptional commitment to whatever she does next. She packed her 2 suitcases, the same 2 she had brought 5 years before, one now but faithful, and she bought her ticket home. On an impulse that she could not fully explain, she decided not to tell Peter she was coming. She wanted to arrive without announcement. She wanted to walk through her own gate and see the house with her own eyes before anyone had time to arrange her experience of it. She wanted to see Peter's face when he realized she was actually, finally home. She did not know that the face she would see would not be the face she was imagining. The flight landed in Lagos on a Thursday morning. The warm air coming through the terminal doors met her like something she had not realized she was starving for. The specific combination of heat and humidity and the smell of her city that is impossible to describe to someone who has not grown up inside it and impossible to forget for someone who has. She stood in it for a moment with her eyes closed, just breathing. She took a taxi to the street. She rolled the window down halfway and watched Lagos move past her, leaning slightly toward the glass, the way you lean toward something you have been away from long enough to need to look at properly. The downfall buses, the hawkers, the sound of 3 different kinds of music coming from 3 different directions simultaneously, the particular quality of light, all of it was exactly as she had left it, and entirely different, and she looked at all of it with the greedy, tender attention of someone returning to their first language after 5 years of speaking only a second one. The taxi turned onto her street. She saw the house from the end of the road. It rose from the street like something from the photographs, but larger, realer, more present. Tall cream walls, a wide veranda with decorative iron railings, large windows that caught the morning light, a beautiful steel gate painted dark blue, flowering plants along the outside wall that someone had planted and tended, outdoor lighting fixtures that she had not specified in the original plan, additions that Peter must have decided on himself, and they were exactly right. The house was magnificent. It was everything she had calculated and projected and imagined from that cold basement room in Alberta at 2 in the morning when she needed a reason to keep going. She sat in the stopped taxi and looked at it for a long moment. Then she heard the music. Not street music, not a neighbor's radio. Music coming from inside the compound, loud, orchestral, the specific music that belongs to a very particular kind of occasion. She frowned, not with alarm, with the mild puzzlement of someone who has encountered an unexpected variable. Perhaps Peter was having guests. Perhaps he had organized something for her arrival, but she had not told him she was coming. She pushed it aside. She paid the driver. She collected her bags. She walked to the gate with her key ready. The gate opened onto a scene that her brain declined in the first several seconds to process. The compound had been transformed. White chairs arranged in perfect rows, facing a raised canopied area decorated with flowers, white and gold everywhere, on every surface. Guests in formal attire, perhaps 200 of them, seated and standing, the women in elaborate head ties and evening lace, the men in agbadas and well-cut suits. Catering staff moving between tables, a master of ceremonies at a microphone who had paused mid-sentence. And at the front of the compound, under the flower-covered canopy, standing before a pastor with an open Bible, stood Peter. Beside him, in a white wedding dress with a long veil and flowers in her hair, stood Esther, her sister. Blessing stood at the open gate of her own compound, with her 2 suitcases beside her and her key still in her hand, and she looked at this scene for what felt like a very long time, but was probably 4 seconds. Her mind did not go blank. It did something more organized and more terrible than going blank. It began, very quietly and methodically, to reassemble the last 5 years in the light of what she was currently looking at. Peter's warmth in the early years and its gradual withdrawal, Esther's consistent cheerfulness, the calls that had become shorter, the voice notes that had stopped, the year 4 nights in the kitchen with both hands around a mug of tea when she had looked at a thought directly and then decided to put it away. She had put it away and come home, and here it was, fully assembled and in white flowers, waiting for her. Peter saw her. The expression that moved across his face lasted less than 2 seconds, but she caught every stage of it. Recognition, then a flash of something complicated that might have been guilt or might have been calculation, and then the deliberate settling of his features into a version of composed that was the most damning thing she had ever seen on a human face. Not grief, not remorse, composure. The composure of a man who has encountered an inconvenience and is deciding how to manage it. He said something quietly to Esther, who had not yet turned around, and walked across the compound toward Blessing with the unhurried pace of a man who believes he controls the terms of what is about to happen. He stopped in front of her. The nearest guest had gone quiet. The MC had fully stopped. A radius of attention was forming around the gate. "Why are you here?" Peter said. Not quietly, at a volume the nearest 20 guests could hear. Blessing looked at him. She felt extraordinarily calm, not the calm of someone who is not feeling anything, the calm of someone who is feeling everything so completely and so simultaneously that it has become a single, undifferentiated state, rather than distinct emotions she can name separately. The calm of a person standing at the exact center of the thing they have been unconsciously preparing for. "Peter," she said. Her voice was even. "This is my house." He looked at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before, a dismissiveness so complete that it had no warmth at all, not even the cold warmth of cruelty, just the flat impatience of a man looking at something that has ceased to be relevant to him. "You are right," he said. "It is a beautiful house. You paid for it faithfully for 5 years, and I want you to know I am genuinely grateful for that. You have excellent discipline with money. But this," he gestured at the compound, the canopy, the flowers, the 200 guests, the woman in the white dress who had now turned around and was watching from the front with a mild irritation. "This is my life, and this life is not the one you were building toward." The compound was completely silent. Even the generator seemed to have had the decency to lower itself. Esther was walking toward them now. She had lifted her dress slightly to navigate the compound floor. She stopped beside Peter and looked at Blessing with an expression that Blessing spent a long time afterwards trying to accurately name. It was not guilt. Guilt has a hunched quality, a looking away quality. It was something more defended than that. The expression of someone who has made peace with a decision by constructing a version of events in which the decision was reasonable. The expression of someone who is about to offer an explanation rather than an apology. "Blessing," Esther said. Her voice was careful. "I know this is a shock, but you need to understand." "I understand everything," Blessing said. And she did.
She understood it completely. She had understood it, she realized, since that night in the kitchen in year 4 with both hands around a mug of tea. She had just chosen not to know it until she was standing on documents solid enough to act on it. She reached into her carry-on. She removed the folder. She had carried it in the inside pocket of her bag all the way from Alberta, through security, through both flights, through the taxi ride from the airport, because she had understood somewhere beneath the level of conscious thought that this was where she was going to need it. She opened it. She removed the title deed. She held it so that Peter could read the name on it clearly. Peter read it, and she watched him read it. She watched the specific quality of his composure begin to change, not dramatically, not with any visible external collapse, but something shifting beneath the surface, a recalculation happening behind his eyes. That is my name on this deed, registered and certified and legally binding. The land is mine, the building permit is mine, the contractor receipts are mine. Every naira spent on this structure is documented and traceable to one account, mine. You have been living for however long this has been going on inside a house that belongs entirely to me. And as of this moment, I am reclaiming it. The 200 guests were very quiet. Peter's voice when it came was lower and harder than before, the managing warmth completely gone. You cannot just come back here and do this. I have lived in this house. I have maintained it. I have spent money on it. Tell me what you spent. Tell me the amount. I will compare it against the transfer records I have here. She lifted the folder. Every month for 5 years. Documented. Then we can have a conversation about what proportion of this house your maintenance contributions might legally entitle you to. I have a lawyer in Lagos who has already reviewed this question. Would you like her number? Peter said nothing. She turned to Esther. Esther was looking at the folder in Blessing's hands with an expression that had finally lost its defensiveness. What was underneath the defensiveness was harder to look at, but Blessing looked at it anyway. She owed herself that much. You are my sister. Our parents are gone, and you are the only family I have in the world, and you were also the last person I would ever have expected to do this to me. I need you to know that I understand the full weight of what you choose. I need you to know that I am going to be carrying that weight for a long time. But I also need you to know that I am not going to let it take this house from me. I earned this house. I am keeping this house. What happens between you and me after today is a separate matter that I am not ready to address right now. She closed the folder. She placed it back in her bag. She looked at the 200 guests sitting in her compound in their fine clothes under white and gold flowers, and she said in a clear and carrying voice, I am sorry for the disruption to your evening. There will be no wedding today. Please help yourselves to the food. Then she walked through her own compound, past the canopy and the flowers and the pastor with his open Bible, and she went inside her own house and she closed the door. Peter did not leave that night without resistance. He sat in the parlor for 3 hours making calls, his voice moving through registers of urgency and then desperation, and then a kind of cold bargaining that Blessing found easier to ignore than anything that had come before it, because bargaining is at least honest about what it is. She sat in her kitchen and made tea and waited. At 11 o'clock, his lawyer called him with what was apparently not encouraging news. At 11:30, he made one final attempt, standing at the kitchen doorway, speaking quietly, offering her a version of events in which his behavior was the inevitable result of her choices, in which the distance had made him lonely, and the loneliness had made him vulnerable, and the vulnerability had made him human. Blessing poured her tea. She did not respond. After a while, he stopped speaking. He left with 2 bags at midnight. She heard the gate. Esther had already left, quietly, without drama, during the period when Peter was on his first call. She had left her wedding dress hanging on the back of the bedroom door. Blessing had looked at it for a long moment and then taken it down and folded it and placed it in a bag by the front door. She sat in her house in the quiet after midnight, and she let herself feel everything she had been holding at a precise controlled distance for the last several hours. The grief of it was enormous. Not primarily the grief of losing Peter. She understood, been losing Peter incrementally for 2 years, and the larger part of that grief was already spent somewhere over the Atlantic in year 4. The grief that was enormous was the grief of Esther. The Sunday calls, the cheerful, detailed conversations, the 5 years of I love you and I miss you and you are doing so well and I am so proud of you, spoken by someone who was also simultaneously doing this. That was the grief that had no bottom to it. That was the one she would have to sit with for a long time. She sat with it. She did not try to resolve it at midnight. She just let it be what it was. Then she went to the bedroom, changed the sheets on her own bed, lay down and closed her eyes. She was in her house. Her name was on the deed. Whatever had happened inside these walls in her absence, the walls themselves were hers. It was a beginning. 6 months after that night, the house had become something entirely different from what it had been when she came home to find it decorated for someone else's wedding. She had repainted the interior, the cream walls replaced with a warm terracotta in the main rooms, a soft sage in the bedroom, the kitchen tiled in white and blue in a pattern she had found in a design magazine and adapted with the help of a tiler from the next street who did the job in 4 days and did it beautifully. She had replaced the wedding flowers with plants she bought from the market on Saturday mornings, potted things, living things, things that required attention and rewarded it. The house felt inhabited now in the way she had always imagined it would feel inhabited, by someone who lived in it fully and intentionally. She was working at a hospital in Ikeja, not the clinic she had left 5 years ago, a larger and better resourced institution that had offered her a senior nursing position on the basis of her Canadian experience and certification. The work was demanding in the ways she was accustomed to, and the work was also, for the first time in 5 years, rooted. She was not working to build the life she was already living. The distinction made every shift feel different from every shift she had worked in Alberta. Not easier, but differently weighted. The labor of investment in your own present life is not the same as the labor of investment in someone else's future. She had not spoken to Esther in 6 months. She had received a letter, handwritten, 3 pages, placed under her gate on a Saturday morning 3 months after the night of the wedding, that she had read twice, and then placed in a drawer. The letter did not make excuses. That was the thing about it that she kept coming back to. Esther had written the whole truth without the comfort of justification. The loneliness of being left with Peter, the way the loneliness had shifted into something else gradually and without any single clear moment of decision, the years of carrying the weight of it and not knowing how to stop. She had not asked for forgiveness. She had only asked to be believed when she said she understood what she had done. She had read twice. She had put it in the drawer. She was not ready to respond, but she had not thrown it away either. And she knew herself well enough to understand that she did not keep things she had finished with. On a Tuesday evening, 7 months after coming home, she was sitting on her veranda when her phone rang. It was Sister Josephine calling from the UK. They talked for a long time about work, about life, about the particular thing that happens to a woman who has been through an enormous thing and come out the other side not broken, but irrevocably changed. Sister Josephine asked how she was, not the social "how are you," but the real one, the one that leaves space for a real answer. Blessing looked out from her veranda at the street, a woman walking with a basket on her head, 2 children arguing over something small and vital, the particular quality of Lagos evening light that she had dreamed about in that basement room in Alberta, and which was, in the way of things you have longed for and then actually received, both exactly what she had imagined and also something more complicated and more real. "I am building something," Blessing said. "It is slower than the last time I built something, and it is more uncertain, and there's nobody sending me photographs of the progress. But I am building something real. I can feel the foundation under me." Sister Josephine was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That is everything. That is actually everything." After she hung up, Blessing sat on the veranda for a while longer. She thought about the spreadsheet she had made in the Ikeja apartment 7 years ago. The salary converted to naira, the living costs subtracted, the net savings projected over 5 years. She had done everything the spreadsheet said. The spreadsheet was right about the numbers. It was not able to account for the human variables, for the specific frailties and hungers of the people she had trusted with the physical reality of her plan while she was 3,000 miles away executing it. But here is what the spreadsheet also could not have predicted: that she would come home, that she would have the documents, that she would stand in her own compound in front of 200 guests and reclaim what was hers with nothing but a folder and the absolute calm of a woman who had prepared for every possibility because her mother taught her that love and documentation are not contradictions. That she would still be standing. The street outside her gate was doing what Lagos streets do in the evening, generating a continuous low-frequency human noise that is its own kind of music. She could smell food cooking somewhere down the block, the kind of smell that means someone is at a stove that belongs to them, in a house that belongs to them, making something that will feed people they love. She stood up, she went inside, she turned on her own stove and began to cook. A house is just walls. A man is just a man. A sister is just blood until she decides what to do with it. But a woman who leaves everything familiar, survives 5 years of cold and labor and longing, sends money home faithfully every month, registers the title deed in her own name because her mother once told her that love and documentation are not contradictions, comes home to find the two people she trusted most at an altar in her own compound and does not collapse, but instead opens her carry-on bag, removes a folder and says calmly and clearly, "My name is on this deed." That woman was never the victim of this story. She was always its architect. Peter and Esther lived in her house for years without understanding that they were living inside her plan. They thought they were building something of their own. They did not understand that everything they were standing on had her name written underneath it. And when she came home to collect what was hers, she did not need anger. She did not need revenge. She did not need an audience. She just needed her folder. Peter did not go to Canada to escape her life. She went to build the foundation for it. The dream was never Canada. The dream was always this street, this house, this stove, this life, entirely and unambiguously hers. She just had to make sure her name was on it before she came home to claim it. It was. It always was. They just forgot who built it. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever given everything to someone who did not protect what you gave them and found the strength to reclaim yourself anyway? Have you ever come home to discover that the people you trusted most were the people you most needed protection from and found that you had already protected yourself without knowing it? Tell me your story in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story moved you, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you have not yet subscribed to the Helen Folktale channel, this is your sign. Thank you for sitting around the fire with me. Until next time.